G'day, welcome back. I just watched the Daniel King Power Play Chess video on the final round of the FIDE 2025 Chess World Cup, where Sindarov beat Wei Yi. And one of the games he covered was a draw, but that was a very interesting pawn endgame. So I would recommend watching Daniel King's video before continuing with this, because I've just said it's a good opportunity this World Cup to sort of look at all the interesting pawn endgames and if any sort of corresponding squares concepts popped up during the tournament. Now, so what I'm going to do first, before we get into the games themselves, is just show you a bit of the workflow, the idea of how you can quickly grab the games and filter them, and then have a list of pawn endgames to look at. Okay, so let's just proceed straight away. So here we got the website for the World Cup, the official website, and obviously the first thing we're going to want to get is the games, right? And have a look at this. You go in pairing results, PGN file. That's it, downloads the PGN file. And if we now look at my folders, you can see, I mean, I downloaded already once, but you can see that you've got all games included in a zip file. So let's double click on it. And now you have a folder. And you can see the way it's organized is, I'm going to say, slightly annoying, I guess is the right way of saying it, because it's actually got PGN files for each round. Round 1, game 1, round game 2, and so on. They're all called games.pgn. And the next step, I mean, I'm doing this because I don't have access to online databases like ChessBase or whatever, right? And I just want to quickly get it in a skin versus. It's a little dedicated database. So, okay, so now we know home downloads Cup 2025. We have that directory structure. So let me just terminal, Linux terminal. Now this is something you use in bash scripts, which I'm not 100% an expert on, but we'll just quickly have a look at how this works. So we'll cd into the downloads directory. You can see that there is that directory Cup 2025, so let's cd into that. And there's all those directories, and each of them has a file in it. So now what we're going to do is there's a little script find current directory, type files, and then you get each file and you execute the cat command on that file name, and basically keep on doing it. Look at that. It went too fast. Went past too fast. Just scroll up. You can see. Let me see if I've got the. You can see the full P. You just scroll up. You can see that's all the games, all gone through. Okay, so that's good. Got all the games now. But now we want to send them somewhere. Let's send them to home directory World Cup 2025.pgn. Okay, they'll all be there now. Let's minimize these things out of the way. File. Open. There it is. And you can see there's a few games. 4 games. There's some error in the PGN file. I'm not looking for perfection here, so we'll just won't worry about them. And you go Windows Game List, and you can see all the games there. Now, the interesting thing is that you can see that that is in a PGN file, and we don't really want a PGN file, so we'll just do the next step where we go File, New. Did this already on another machine, doesn't seem to be there. World Cup 2025 as a database. Now, the thing about that is the database allows you to edit it, right? Allows you to save it. Whereas the PGN, you can just look at, you can go through the games, but you can't do much with it, right? So what we want to do now is we've got, oh, it's open already. Okay, so we'll just drag them across into there. Copy. And now we can close the PGN. And here's the database, which we've got with 667 games in it. Right, so what's the first thing we want to do? We want to look for pawn endgames. Now, I use Scoutfish almost all the time for filtering for things, but we can use a search function here, material pattern, looks like that. And all we want to do is we want 0 queens, 0 rooks, 0 bishops, 0 knights, all zeros down there, all zeros down there. Oh, we didn't press 0 properly. 0, 0, 0, 0. But 0 to 8 pawns is fine. Let's see what happens if we search for that. Okay, close. Got 36 games. One we're going to look at a bit later is this one. But I want to just go back to the board, and you can see what the search function does is it puts you on the position of the board where that material combination first occurred. So here is U versus Narayanan. And we'll just, let's move later. We'll just click through. There's a few which kind of look corresponding square-ish. We go to this one. I said we're going to go back to exactly this one. And we're going to look at this position from a few moves later on from this position. Okay, cool. So that, I just wanted to show you the workflow. Very easy to get these games from the internet, and then very easy to filter them within SCID versus PC itself. And then now I'm going to skip to the future because I've picked about 6 of these games and I've made some notes on them, and we will go through those in turn. Okay, so I'll just use this layout for today. So you've got the board, analysis board, and then here's the game list in Skid versus PC, which I have detached, and it's just a floating window all by itself, and I'll put it over there. And you can see what I've done. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games you can have a look at. 2 or 3 of them have elements of corresponding squares, and the other couple are just very interesting pawn endgames. So let's go through these. First one, and it's actually quite surprising. This is Sindarov in an earlier round beat Yu Yang Yi, so I didn't realize he actually beat 2 of these really top Chinese players on the way to winning the tournament. And this was a very interesting endgame. You can see I've got it up there. And let's have a look what this endgame turns into. You can see that obviously there's very advanced pawns on both sides. So there's only one continuation would make sense. Push, queen, and this gets back to that earlier video I did with the 192 ply checkmate with queen versus queen with an extra knight's pawn. And if you remember back to that video, the pawn really has to be on the 5th or the 6th rank to be winning position. This should be a draw. But on the other hand, I think it was about 2/3 of the positions are actually won by white because white just plays on and eventually wins one way or the other. Now, there is a video on YouTube showing that Yu Yang Yi actually lost on time. Very, very, very sad for him, unfortunately. And was Sindarov really trying to win? I mean, he was just playing moves, gradually pushing his pawn, all that sort of stuff. And as I said, it's a theoretical drawn position, but more than likely the weaker side will lose, which is what happened in this case. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing because this is on this move 65 and it gets to move 125. You can see now, just note this, you can see that the line there is red, just the Skid versus PC feature. It means the game is not saved, and we've made some changes to it, and if you move to another game we save it. That's the best thing to do. Right, and you can see it just goes on, checks and checks. If you go back to my earlier video, you'll see how painful this is. And basically the black king should be staying over this corner, hiding over here, and it should be a draw. Now what I did is I did a sort of a 5-second analysis all the way through this game, which is sufficient for the end game. And once again, I came up with a score graph. You can see that for most of this game, all the way to about move 100, it is draw. And then for a big chunk of it, up for about the next 20 moves, it should be win for white. And then on and off and on and off and on and off to win a draw. And you can see that that's basically the pattern with this end game. So it's really good to see it in a real world example. So let's just close that and go to the final position, which was queen h4 check, which is actually a blunder. And this is quite interesting. I thought this was interesting that there's an alternative move, queen to d7, and that obviously stops the pawn from advancing. White left to move his king and all this sort of thing. Anyway, so queen h4 check was played. Now, if you look at the video, I think actually he's lost on time there, and now you see why queen h4 check was a blunder. There is no, typical pinning the pawn and stopping it from rotating, and with the squares which the black queen could check from, can't check. So the game's lost now because the pawn will promote, white will have 2 queens. So this is the sort of position that white's obviously plays on and plays on and plays on, and the black makes a blunder, or the weak side makes a blunder, and the game's a won. In this case, it was Yu Yang. He lost on time, which is very, very tough for him. Okay, that's quite interesting. Nothing corresponding squares, but it's a position I've tried to analyze before. Very complicated, way beyond my pay grade, but it's interesting to see how these players approach it. Okay, so let's go on to the next game I have highlighted, which is Ivic versus Martinez. Oh, okay. So this is quite a simple corresponding square concept. White is a pawn up. If white could penetrate, then he would win, but doesn't work that way. So we can sort with the corresponding squares. This is this triple pattern where you block from the side, white can't get in. So then white has to do something else, which is in this case to advance the pawn. And you see he's eventually decided that he has to advance the pawn, but this is also a drawn endgame, which you can satisfy yourself with. It went on much longer. White can't penetrate. Advance the pawn, and that will be a draw. Okay, that was quite interesting. So let's move to the next game. Okay, so this once again is just look at it from corresponding squares perspective. We're just doing a bit of practice on this. So what's this is Karthikeyan versus Adani, and looking from the black side this time. When black gets to e4, e2, otherwise black will be penetrating through the d3 or the f3 square. So then if you think where you have to be when black is on the e5 square, then basically anywhere except d2. Those squares around there. And then, so the next thing is, well, we can't be on d4. Let's see if we're on d5. I think it's the same thing. We can be there, or there, or there, or there. So basically, you can see that if black tries to triangulate, we have enough squares. And I think the main reason for that is that there's only one access point, one key square, and white has plenty of space. Right? So that's how you think about that in terms of corresponding squares. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. Okay, so this is the game I mentioned, very important game, Sindar of Wei Yi. It was drawn, and it's the one which Daniel King covers very well in his video. Go and watch that first. This becomes a corresponding squares position. I mean, this is the only thing that white can do. So with equal pawns, white has the advantage, advanced king, better pawn structure. So let's think about the same sort of things. I think we can see once again that's the key square. Similar to the previous example, you have to block the access points. So particularly since you've also got to cover this side of the board, and then now we can sort of map out the rest of them, right? So that's if you're on f5. So if you're on f4 back here, then we can be all those squares work. Yeah. So that if the king advances, then you get to f7 as required. And the other square you should think about is the sort of triangulating position. So you've got those squares matching. Now, I'm not going to highlight the g7, g8, because what happens with g7, g8? Did I do that variation? Just for example, so this was drawn, a few more moves were played. Variation. See, king goes there. So in this position, black can still block the advance to the queen side. And I mean, I guess the main thing is you're blocking access to the d6 square. We go back to this position, that if we're on e4 and you are on g7 or g8, white will get to the d6 square and he'll either win that pawn or he'll win. So a lot of different corresponding squares there. Of course, in the game continuation, none of that happened, and they went around a few moves, and then they agreed to a draw, because obviously black will now move there, and that will be a draw. Okay, so that's another little just simple lightweight example of corresponding squares. And before we do Kledura Wei Yi, which is all of these interesting endgames, I'm just going to skip forwards to this other game, Adani Karthikeyan. That match had two interesting endgames, and here we have an interesting position where actually b3 wins. And why does b3 win? You'll see this, it's the tempo move. b3, and then the black king has to back off, and you will win. In fact, that's quite straightforward, using a tempo move, which, if you look at Daniel King's video in the other game, there was no tempo move. Here we have a tempo move. b3, you win because king will have to back off. e6, for instance. We can go through that line. Do I have that line? Yeah, b3, king backs off somewhere, penetrate that way, and it'll just win in time, okay? But what was played in the game was b4, so you've wasted your tempo move now. The game continuation, king e6 lost. The drawing move is b5. This is kind of curious, and although there is quite one of these funny risky situations where your own pawn blocks your retreat. So let's go through that. Got to start heading back. And this position's a draw. It's not what happened in the game. Go back to the game continuation. You took. And it's a win. Okay, so the final one we're going to look at is not corresponding squares, but I found it very interesting. We have this position on the board. And what I was doing, I'll just show you. I mean, I'll just bring up the analysis. I was just flicking through these positions after I'd done the filter. and said what's going on with different positions. So the Glidura, Wei Yi, early round, and you'll notice h4 is the only drawing move. And so what's going on there? Right now I understand it because I've looked at it a bit, obviously with the aid of the computer, but also trying to sort of understand in general terms what is going on. And it's very interesting. h4 is the only drawing move because if you look at this position, what's going on? White is obviously threatening to destroy the black king side and then advance his own pawns. But that will take some time. There's not really much defense to that. I mean, obviously, you can sort of imagine retreating back to c8, holding the king there, but that's most likely going to be a losing position because of either swapping off some of the pawns first and running across and getting the g6 pawn eventually. So the reason why h4 draws is it's the only way to engineer a pawn break on the kingside reliably. So let's have a look at h4 was the game continuation, and let's see how that wins. I found this very instructive. And see, white didn't even go for the pawns on the queen side because black can create a passed pawn on the queen side. So yeah, this continues, right? So now take that off. Now the position is quite blocked. Can't make progress. You call this a corresponding squares position in the end. Go back to this position where h4 was played. Try g5 instead. Why doesn't g5 work? Because now g3, only winning move. You know, maybe block the king. Try and switch back. Obviously the pawns are just dropping. Why didn't that work in the other line? Just do take, for instance. It may be simpler to say, let's just continue. Let's say the white king dived in. f4. Which way are you going to take? Matter, right? So this gets back to h4 is the only move which gives you that formation where you're able to ensure that you can create a passed pawn on the king side. I thought that was very instructive. Only way to draw, and where you knew how to draw and you drew. So that was interesting, right? So as I said, that's another sort of his technique when you're looking at end games of better players. Just have the engine up and running, and then suddenly, oh, that's an only move. Why is that an only move? Now I understand why it's an only move, and therefore, when you're playing games like this yourself, you say, okay, well, let's always think about it. Looks totally lost, but actually, the pawn break on the king side is enough a counterplay to ensure the draw. And then you think, oh, you go back even before then, why black's pawn so far advanced on the king side? Because obviously he was thinking along those lines. Okay, great. So hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching.